In this video, we're going to be writing some code in RStudio and familiarizing ourselves with the RStudio interface. So I'd encourage you to follow along with me. If you are using Posit Cloud, you might go to your Posit Cloud workspace and then either create a new project or just work inside, say, your Lab 0 project that you might have created from the first video. If you are using RStudio on your personal computer, you might just open that up through your search bar, search for RStudio. Be careful not to open up just R. RStudio is going to be the more user-friendly interface. It will look kind of like this. All right, so just a quick word about what we mean by coding. Coding is just like a way to provide instructions to your computer. So for example, if you were using a calculator, you do kind of do coding in the sense that we give arithmetic instructions like 2 plus 2. And RStudio is going to, or I should say R as a language also accepts arithmetic functions like that as well. Where you might create a sine function to find, say, the sine of an angle measure. So think of R as a coding language that has a lot of those functions, but has way, way more functions specific to data analysis. So there's lots of different coding languages out there. Python's another popular one that people use that does a lot of different things, but R is very specific for data analysis, and there's a lot of built-in functions we'll use. All right, so now we're ready to interact with RStudio. So when you first open it, you'll probably first notice this console window. Sometimes it's called the command line, where we can just write and run code. However, it's not a very user-friendly way to do this. You're more likely going to want to open up an R script. And I'll go ahead and switch over the Posit Cloud version, not because it's really different, just because I think that's what most folks are using. So make an R script. And then within that, we can write some code that we might want to run. If I want to run this code, I can highlight this, I can click run, it shows up in my console. I could also put my cursor here at the beginning, that's going to run as well, that's fine. If I want to write more code, I can do so on a different line, I can run that, I can highlight it all, I can run it. So this is just nice because you can both edit your code here and you can both save your code as a new script in this case. So I'm going to click the save button, I'm going to call it sample script. If you're in Posit Cloud, it's going to show up over here in this kind of file pane for this project. If you're on RStudio on your personal computer, you're technically going to save this to your computer. I'd encourage you to make a folder called R or a photo called, say, Stat212 if that's the course that you're in. And that way you can save all of your R stuff in the same place, and it's nice and easy to find on your computer in its own file. So I'll kind of leave that to you. All right, so we've talked about saving our script now. So this code is pretty boring so far. I haven't really done anything interesting. More often when we're coding in RStudio, we're probably going to be working with vectors and data frames. Vectors and data frames are both called objects in R. So what do we mean by an object? An object is something that we can save under a name that we can then complete operations on under its name, that R recognizes that name for the rest of our session or within our project. So I'm going to create a vector for heights. So I'm going to start by defining the letter C, and then in parentheses I'm going to type 60. I'm just going to do some numbers that might kind of function as heights, 62, something like that. And now I can run this. So the C is a function in R that stands for, I think it's combine. So if I write some things in a C function like this, it's going to connect them all together as a singular object. Now I can give this vector a name. I'm going to call it height. So now if I run this, R is going to save this object under the name height. So now I can call that back up. If I just type height and run that, R is going to know what I mean. It's going to find that over here. R is case sensitive though, so if you type capital H when you named it lowercase h, it's not going to recognize that. It's also not going to recognize if you add, say, an S to it. That is not the same thing. That is not listed in your global environment. It's got to match exactly. So there's lots of things I can do. I could find the mean of height. I can complete that operation. So I can use a mean function to find the height, to find the mean of my vector height, and it's going to compute that for me. Okay, so vectors, that's one type of object. I would say more often, though, we're actually going to be working with data frames. So I'm going to quickly create a data frame. You don't need to know how to create data frames in this course. It's just going to be, for sake of this demonstration, more likely we're going to be importing things already as data frames or using a data frame saved in something called a package later in this course. So let's just create a quick data frame. I'm going to borrow this height vector. So let's say height is one vector in there. I'll also add weight. So I'll just kind of make some values up. And then I'm going to add some names because then it feels a little bit more real. So I'll just use my name, a couple of my colleagues' names, so Carly and Kit. I'll use the K names. Okay, so I can run this data frame. I'm going to call it people. So I'm going to assign it to the name people so that when I run this, it's now going to show up in my global environment. R recognizes that name people as representing this data frame with 3 columns or 3 variables with 3 entries each. So now I can run some functions from vectors inside this data frame. Now notice, let's say that I wanted to find the mean of weight inside this data frame. If I try to run that, R is not going to know where to find weight because weight does not show up in my global environment right here. Instead, it's like a category inside people. It's a sub-object, you might say, or it's a variable inside people. So we'll learn this a little bit in one of the later labs, probably the next lab, that we can find vectors inside data frames by using the $sign notation, except that needs to go over here. So first I have my data frame name, $sign, and then the vector that I'm trying to summarize. And now R is going to have a way to find that. It's kind of like an address where it's like this is a general location, and then this is a specific thing it's going to look for inside that object. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about comments. So comments are a way to nicely organize your code. You don't have to write comments, but I highly recommend just labeling, say, question 1, question 2, question 3 in your assignment. It just makes it a lot easier to come back to and kind of find things that you're looking for. Or you can make comments that are specific to the things that you're doing. So like arithmetic, vector, stuff like that. You can also make more than one if you want to make it really, really easy to see. So sometimes people like to make comments like this so that it takes up a lot of space and it commands a lot of attention. It makes it easy to see those section breaks. And so in addition to organizing your code, you might also be wondering, well, why do we put this little hashtag symbol in front of it? Why don't we just write vector like this? Well, 1, because it's not as easy to recognize, but number 2, because R will not differentiate that from your code if you were to happen to highlight that. So R is going to get confused what you mean by this. It thinks that it's code and it's trying to interpret it as code. Whereas if this was commented like this, then I would run this and R is going to ignore that. It's going to recognize it as a comment. It's going to keep moving on. Also, be in the habit of making spaces between different things that are supposed to be separate. It doesn't have to be different, right? So I can have these side by side and that's fine. It just makes it such that it's easier to read your code, or for those of us helping you, we can help you a lot faster than if you sandwich all of your code together. It's just a lot harder to read these as kind of separate lines of code that are supposed to be doing different things. Okay, so we've saved a couple things to our global environment. Just be sure that if you're using the same project on Posit Cloud, or if you're on a personal computer, just be in the habit of clearing your global environment between assignments so that you don't have this kind of cluttered with objects from old assignments. So that's something that you might keep in mind. I also just want to make quick mention of a really easy mistake when coding with, say, parentheses and honestly other things that we'll see later on. If I had made one too many parentheses here and I tried to run this code, I'm going to get, number 1, I'm going to see a red X here. That's saying that probably something is wrong here. But if I went ahead and ran this, notice that I didn't actually get an error message here because R actually just thinks I haven't finished coding. It thinks that I have one more closed parenthesis, or I have something to add to this argument. So if you see that, most likely you can just fix it, run it again. but it's not actually going to run it correctly until it's finished closing off this argument. So you might have to run it at least once before it figures out something is wrong, and now you're able to run this and it's going to be fine. Or if you notice this and you're not sure how to get rid of it, sometimes you see this little plus sign icon, meaning that R thinks you're still inside of an argument, and then you keep writing code and the plus sign's still there and it's still there and it's still there as you try to run new things. You can also go to this little session button up here and just choose to restart R, and now it's going to fix that to a sideways caret, and now it's ready to accept new working code. Also keep in mind, if you do restart your session, you will have to redefine any objects that you're using. You will have to, we'll talk about librarying your packages again if you're using a package. All right, and then the last thing I want to just mention is you can customize a few things by going to Tools and then Global Options. For those on a personal computer, I would recommend unchecking these two boxes right here and changing this to Never. If you're on Posit Cloud, it really doesn't matter. But if you're on a personal computer, this will just kind of save you the headache of having a couple dialog boxes open up whenever you try to close R or open R and things like that. Also, if you're on a personal computer, you can also choose to where to set what's called your working directory. So when you save things, like save a script, if you wanted to always save in this R folder that you might have created, you can click Browse and then choose that folder on your computer to do that. So just thought I'd mention that. And then lastly, this is for everyone. If you want to customize, say, the appearance, if you want to go with like a dark theme, you can choose one of these different theme options just in case that is something that you enjoy. All right, so that's the last thing that I have to mention for this video. So we'll close things there.